Welcome to another reading wrap up. Here's everything that I read in March. All right, numbers first. I read 5 books in total in March. Well, I finished 5 books. I always count the books in the month that I finished them. I hope that makes sense. So sometimes I start them earlier, but then, these are the books that I finished in March. So 5 books in total. 2 of them were audiobooks. I think March was overall a very normal reading month for me. There was definitely one big highlight, which I will talk about in a second. It was also my birthday month. Also, I feel like March is the first month where spring reading kicks off. And I love spring reading. What I love about spring reading is that you can already take your book outside, even though it might still be a little bit cold, but you can have a nice coffee and read your book on a bench or somewhere else on the balcony. And yeah, I love spring reading. The first book that I finished in March was an audiobook. So this is one of the 2 audiobooks that I mentioned. It was Yes Please by Amy Poehler. I have to say I was a bit disappointed. I think this book was so hyped when it first came out. I feel like this and Tina Fey's Bossy Pants are 2 audiobooks that very much had their moment, and they were being recommended as audiobooks left, right, and center. And I finally got to Yes Please, as I've said. I love Amy Poehler. I love her podcast, Good Hang. It's such a staple during my week to watch this podcast, and it just brings me so much joy. I also am a big fan of that whole Saturday Night Live era with Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, Bill Hader, Fred Armisen. So I was so excited to get more behind the scenes stuff in this book, but I feel like she didn't really talk about SNL that much. I mean, of course, it's her book. She doesn't have to talk about that one job that she had um, extensively, but what kind of didn't really click for me was that I feel like a lot of the book was dealing with her having her children. And I understand that to her this was a big deal, but I wasn't that interested. I wasn't that interested in pregnancy stories and birth stories. And I mean, she told them in a funny way, in a very Amy Poehler way, very humorous, sarcastic, which I enjoy her tone, but again, I feel like the majority of the book was her telling her story as a mom, which wasn't necessarily something that I connected to. But overall, it was a nice book, a good audiobook for the gym, at least for me, and a very easy listening experience. So I'm glad that I finally listened to it, but it wasn't, I don't know. I think my expectations were a bit too high, or at least I was expecting something else. And therefore, this wasn't necessarily my favorite. Then I finished Mona by Pola Olicharak. And this was a novel that my friend gave me because she unhauled it from her bookshelf. And I had this forever. I think I had this for at least 2 years before I finally read it. And I think I also already talked about this book in a vlog, but just to give you a brief summary, this book is about Mona. And she is a writer from South America. She goes to this literary conference where a literary prize is awarded to a writer. So there are several writers at this conference, and they're all kind of competing with each other, which very much sets the tone and the atmosphere at this conference. And also, there's definitely something looming over Mona. There is something that has happened in her past quite recently that she's kind of coming to terms with, even though she doesn't necessarily clearly remember what happened to her. This is the point where I have to tell you that you should definitely check for content warnings before reading this, because it does deal with some very heavy topics. But yeah, she's at this literary conference. They are trying to find out who gets this award. And yeah, that's the story pretty much. What I liked about this book was the atmosphere and also the setting. I think the author did a great job at creating, yeah, this very competitive atmosphere. Because this conference is taking place in Sweden, I think most of the characters, they come from all over the place, and I feel like they all felt a bit isolated. And with Mona as the main character, we definitely, as a reader, feel this isolation and this difficulty that she has connecting to the other writers, which again is very much due to what has happened to her recently and her memory loss. I feel like this is very much weird girl fiction of a certain time. I think I already said this in my vlog, but if I had read this when it first came out, I think it came out in 2021. It first came out in 2019. Anyway, if I had read this earlier in my reading life, I think this would definitely had more of an impact on me. But I feel like I kind of overread a bit on this weird girl trope. It didn't do much for me. I have to say, I loved the ending. The ending was incredible. I would have never guessed that it would go that way. I wouldn't necessarily call it a twist, but it was definitely an ending that I didn't see coming. And I hope this doesn't spoil anything, but the ending is just this huge escalation, which I loved. I had so much fun. I was laughing out loud whilst reading the ending because it was so absurd and so chaotic and extreme. So that's something that I definitely enjoyed about this book. And then I took it to a book exchange that I was organizing, and another friend of mine took it home. So this book is now traveling throughout our friend group. Next up, the highlight of my reading month, and a book that I actually own, which is Lost Lambs by Madeline Cash. And I don't know what to say except for believe the hype. This is amazing. This is everything I wanted when I picked this up. I had seen some stuff online about this book, and I knew that there was a certain buzz that it was creating, and it sounded interesting to me. So I picked it up on a random Friday night at the bookshop. And boy, am I glad I did that. This is a very strong contestant for my favorite books of 2026. And I feel like what I've now seen online, a lot of people feel this way. Lost Lambs is about the Flynn family and the family members' respective struggles. The parents are now in this open relationship, in this open marriage, which the mother decided to be in without really having the father's consent. He's sleeping in the minivan whilst she is having an affair with the neighbor. And then there are three daughters, Abigail, Louise, and Harper, and they're all dealing with their own stuff. Abigail, the eldest, she is dating this guy called War Crime Wes, which when I read that in the synopsis, this was definitely something that drew me in. Louise, who's the typical middle child, she has an online boyfriend who is a terrorist, and he's kind of trying to recruit her for a terrorist attack. And then there's Harper, and she's being sent to this wilderness camp for difficult children. And I feel so bad for Harper. I love her. And she is also very much into conspiracy theories, and she thinks something is going on in their coastal small town. This small town is somewhat run by this billionaire character who very much reminded me of Jeff Bezos. And yeah, he's doing some very shady stuff. And let's just say the storyline with the billionaire is very current, very, very current. I think that's all I can say without spoiling anything. The writing is incredible. This is Madeline Cash's first novel. I can't believe it. It's so good. The writing is just, it's so captivating. I felt I was right there with these characters. I felt like I was part of this family who's just going through it. And I just wanted to keep reading, keep reading, keep reading. The way that she flashes out these characters is just amazing. They feel so alive. They feel so realistic. I feel like I know these people. It somewhat reminded me of The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. The way that she creates these characters and her world building and these different storylines that run parallel to each other but also intertwine. It very much reminded me of The Rabbit Hutch, which is also one of my all-time favorite books. And I always say that The Rabbit Hutch is unlike anything I've ever read. And I would also say that this is unlike anything I've ever read, even though I just compared the two. But they're completely different. But for some reason, they reminded me of each other in terms of the way they made me feel and the way both books really sucked me in. You have to read this. I also feel like everyone would like this. I had a friend stay with me for my birthday. I made her buy this. And then I also recommended this to so many other people already. I feel like everyone would enjoy this. This is my very confident recommendation that you should read this. Next up, another audiobook. I listened to What Remains by Carol Radziwill, another book that I already mentioned in my last vlog, but this is a book about this friendship group consisting of John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and JFK Jr.'s cousin and his wife, who is the author of this book. If you don't know, JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, they died in a plane crash. He was actually the one who was flying this plane, and she was on board, and then also her sister was on board, and they crashed. And Anthony Radziwill, who was JFK Jr.'s cousin, at that time was going through cancer treatment, and he actually died, I think, 3 weeks after this fatal plane crash. So Carol Radziwill wrote her story, wrote the story of their friendship group, and how in the matter of a month, basically, she lost not only her best friends, but also her husband, which I know it sounds so sad, and it is very tragic. What I liked about this book, this was always on my TBR because I am very interested in the Kennedy family for some reason. I always have been. Even as a teenager, I would watch documentaries on JFK and Bobby Kennedy and, you know, the whole family. And yeah, I always wanted to read this or listen to this, which I now did. And what I liked about it is that Carol Radziwill is actually a journalist. So she was a TV journalist. Not sure what she's doing now. I think somewhere I saw something that she's one of the Real Housewives. Is that true? I'm very much not familiar with this whole housewife universe. Anyway, she was a TV journalist, and this really filters through in her writing. Because, as I've said, this is a very tragic story, and of course, it's a very personal story. But she did such a great job writing this story. I enjoyed her writing style so much, and especially the audiobook was incredible because she reads it herself, and you really feel like she's telling you her story, but not in a very sensationalized, but very matter of fact without losing the emotion in it, I would say. So I'm happy that I finally listened to it. And I would recommend this not only if you're interested in the Kennedy family, but just in general. I think sometimes memoirs are worth the read, even though you might not know anything about the person or about the story. So this is one of them. I think a lot of people would enjoy this. My final book, I also have a physical copy, which is Ruth Rendell, A Judgment in Stone. I found this on the street, which I love finding books on the street. Jesus. And I had read other books by Ruth Rendell. She also published under the name Barbara Wine. And my godmother is a huge fan, so reading her books was kind of passed on to me. Because if there's one person I trust when it comes to crime and thrillers, it's my godmother. And yeah, I found this on the street and I wanted a quick read. This is a very short book. And I have to say, this wasn't anything special. It was a good story. It was published in the 70s, and it is about this housekeeper who starts working for this rich family outside of London. And on Valentine's Day, she kills basically the entire family. I think only one of the children survives because he's not there. This is not a spoiler. It's in the synopsis already. So yeah, this housekeeper kills the entire family, which we know from the beginning, and then we find out why she did it. And as I've said, for me, this was a very average read. I can't say too much about it. It kept me entertained. What I love about the author, though, is that her that her characters' motives are always depicted as very psychological, and she does it in a non-exploitive, very tasteful manner. Even for a book published in the 70s, I feel like the way she talks about mental health is very much in line with our current understanding. That's what I very much enjoyed about this book as well. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if you happen to find it somewhere or, see it at the library or something, definitely something that you could read as a quick thriller. Those are all the books that I read in March. As always, I want to know, what did you read and what did you enjoy? Did you DNF any books? Any hate reads? As always, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel if you want to see more reading wrap-ups or vlogs. I hope you're well and I hope you're excited for spring reading. I am. And then I will be seeing you in the next one. Bye!